everyone. Welcome to Association of Indian Research Scholars 18th webinar on a topic that is relevant and so interesting that we have had received an overwhelming response in terms of registrations. Before we event, I request all the participants to please mute themselves and turn their videos off for better streaming. We are recording this webinar and we are also live on Facebook. Let me introduce the speaker. She was my senior. It is always a great pleasure to introduce your speaker who you have personal relations with. She was my senior during my masters at University of Hyderabad. Dr. Sinjini Bhattacharya received her PhD in 2018 on uh, initiatives of civil society organization in communal harmony building and religious conflict resolution in India. She has been teaching political science at St. Francis College for Women Begumpet since 2018. She has published articles in various newspapers and web portals. Part of her MPhil thesis was also published in an article. She has edited and written chapters for Telugu Academia. Her areas of interest are religion and politics, conflict studies, social media, and right-wing politics. She has presented papers at New Zealand in University of Canterbury and Dublin Trinity College as well as University of Hyderabad. She has taught at IIIT Hyderabad for a couple of semesters and have also worked with Hyderabad Urban Lab. With such an inspirational academic resume, she is with us today to share with us her research findings. I now request Dr. Sinjini to take over. Over to you, Dr. Sinjini.
Thanks, Ariba. And like you said, the feeling is mutual. When you got in touch, it was really, a surprise, and I really was looking forward to it. Although I'm very nervous because this year has been all about taking online classes and has got nothing to do with research. This is, I feel like I'm, again, like restarting my research journey or something because it has been that kind of a year. But at the same time, when I was, we got in touch a while back, and after that, I have seen one after the other the people who have given talks in these webinars, and I so feel so privileged. Some of them were my own professors, and some of them stalwarts in the field of political science. So it feels really great to talk in the same space that they did. And I was telling you over message also, you've done a fantastic job in terms of the reach, because there was someone, a friend of mine who is not even in academics. She messaged me from Delhi saying, wait, why don't I know about this? When are you doing this? Although I had not informed her, she knew about it, and I was really amazed at that. So having said that, let me just tell you a little bit about what I intend to do today. So I was thinking that, just jumping directly into exactly the scope of the topic will be really difficult because it'll be quite disjointed. And I did not want to do that. I wanted to give a sort of background to what and how my work evolved. So I will talk to you a little bit about the theory bit of it, and then talk to you about the exact subject matter of my thesis in the briefest of manners, and then talk to you about the women that I encountered, the women that I had the very good fortune of talking to, some of their experiences. And when I'm talking about women, I'll do two parts actually. One, I will talk about the organizations and what sort of programs and what were the programs that these women's organizations or organizations in general did for women. And then I will talk to you about some of the women who were running organizations or were associated with harmony building, who I met along my journey of fieldwork. So that is the sort of structure that I thought I will do for today's webinar. And I am going to read out little bit, talk to you. So bear with me if I'm not always looking at the camera. Just give me. Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Let me start with like a little anecdote actually. And this is something that I experienced during my field work. And when I was when I was thinking about the presentation, I did not know any better way to start this conversation today. So, when I was in Gujarat, I went to Gujarat. I went to Ahmedabad actually a couple of times. Once I went in 2013, and then the next time I went, no, 2012 I went for the first time, and then I went in 2015. 2012 I was taking baby steps into research, and 2015 I was gearing towards the end of my research. So when and both the times actually I stayed in Vastrapur in Ahmedabad, very close to IIM Ahmedabad, and quite a posh area and quite a majority community dominated area. So one of those days when I was going on my field work, I had to go to this place called Juhapura. Now, because I was not well aware of the places there at that point of time, whenever I went to a new city, I always asked around, for directions, and also I've always wanted to find out, living on scholarship money, I always wanted to find out how much it is going to cost me to get there. And in Ahmedabad, I mostly used to take autos to do my thing, and autos used to run on meter. So I asked around and I got an estimate of how much it's going to take, cost me to get there. But I also heard little murmurings of it might be difficult for me to get there. Anyway, I got out of the hostel that I was living in. I hailed down an auto. I said, Juhapura. He looked at me and he said, okay, but I will not take you inside. I knew that it is going to be a challenge to get an auto in the first place, so I jumped in. He said, I'm not going to go by meter. I'm going to charge you extra. I agreed to all of those because I had been forewarned that it might be difficult for me to get an auto. So I got in, and on the way we had a conversation. He obviously realized that I'm not from Gujarat because I was speaking in Hindi. I probably also gave out the naive researcher vibe. So we got into a conversation. The conversation went to him trying to explain why he did not want to get into Juhapura. And he also said, in the end, it sort of ended with, no, they are also good people. Anyway, in Juhapura, I was meeting a lawyer who had set up her organization there. And through the course of our conversation, she said, Juhapura is nicknamed Mini Pakistan. Muslim families had migrated to Juhapura after 2002 because they did not feel safe in their neighborhoods. And now, no Hindu woman would actually ever knowingly go to, I mean, everyone would know, so no one would actually go to Juhapura. So that is the reason why I had that exchange with the auto driver that I had. She also goes on to tell me that, she used to have an office in another part of the city, but later she had to move because of her very Muslim sounding name. She no longer could rent that place out. So therefore, although it meant moving to the outskirts of the city, that is where Juhapura was, she had to take that step because she was not finding any places to rent. She also told me that because of that move, she lost out on all her Hindu woman employees. No one, the organization had started somewhere around 2007, 2008. I was interviewing her in 2015. No one in her organization belonged to the Hindu faith because of the location of her office. Now, it was a very telling conversation. I will tell you more about that conversation as we progress. But then, after the meeting, I got out of Juhapura, and now it was time to come back to Vastrapur. I found it extremely difficult to get an auto back. I hailed down a number of autos. No one was agreeing to go to Vastrapur, which is obviously known to be a certain kind of area. And I finally hailed down an auto who again said, okay, fine, I'll take you, but I will charge you extra. I jumped in and I got back to Vastrapur. All the while in the back of my mind, and it has stayed with me, I guess, that this is the particular situation, or this, is a telling sign of the communal disharmony in this country. There is no apparent conflict. Incidents of violence have come down. Any study on communal violence will tell you this, that the incidents of communal violence have come down over a period of time. They are more smaller skirmishes, localized, but communal tension or disharmony is always right at the surface. It just requires a spark and it will erupt. And that is where I situate my study, or the importance of my study. Now, moving on, my work, tried to look at civil society organizations, and it was in like the inspiration, or what I was basing my work off of was a huge body of international literature. Uh, Works that had been done by civil society organizations in various war-torn areas of the world, places like Sri Lanka, places like Guatemala, Nepal, much more divided societies, what you would call a deeply divided society. It is in those contexts that civil society organizations had done very seminal works towards bridging gaps, towards getting people the help that is required, towards raising human rights issues. All of those things, civil society organizations had a history of doing that. And over a period of time, various people had tried to understand what it meant for civil society work in conflict zones. And one of the most concrete classifications, or the best way of understanding civil society work was done by Tanya Paffenholz. And it is her classification of civil society work that I used in my context as well. What was interesting to note is that the definition of peace changes with the definition of conflict. And with that, the work that civil society organizations were doing also changes, but they intrinsically also remain the same. So in India, where it isn't a deeply divided society, the state machinery has not broken down. There is, the incidents of violence have come down significantly from what it was in the early 2000s. Even in that context, the civil society organizations that were there were doing similar work to what other organizations who were working in these extremely volatile places were also doing. Now, this sort of became the basis for my work. This became, what I based my PhD off, where I situated my PhD, because it is important to understand why I did this work, or at all. I spent 5 years of my life. I should have been able to justify it to myself as to why I was doing this work, because it had to be important to me. And this is where I situated my work. This is where the importance of this work laid. Now, I, through the course of my PhD, wanted to figure out what the methodology was of civil society organizations in India, what they did and how they did. All of that was something that I wanted to figure out through the course of my research. And before I go into anything else, I want to clarify two things. I'm not going to go into the details, or I'm not going to try to break down, unpack the word civil society. There's a lot of conversation that can happen over what I mean by civil society, and of course, a lot has been said about what is this idea of civil society. I, however, am not going to get into that. When I say civil society, I simply mean, NGOs, IGOs, community-based organizations, research organizations that work on communal harmony building in India. Those are the kinds of organizations I took up. And at the same time, communal, the word communal here means Hindu-Muslim conflict, because those are the two largest communities, and conflict was the most widespread in that context in India. And just to give you a little bit more background, I took up 8 organizations in 4 cities in India, and I looked at their programs. I spoke to people associated with those organizations. I followed, some of their programs, and I did, I analyzed the contents that they create to come up with conclusions in my PhD. Now, these organizations were Danvikas and Center for Development in Ahmedabad, Center for Study of Society and Secularism and All India Secular Forum in Mumbai, Confederation of Voluntary Association and Apna Watan in Hyderabad, and Aman Biradari and Act Now for Democracy and Harmony in Delhi. So these were the 8 organizations that I took up. Now, all the cities, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Delhi, have had history of communal violence. Ahmedabad, of course, is infamous, but Hyderabad has seen its own turbulent period. So has Mumbai, in the 90s. And then there is Delhi, which also has had incidents of communal violence, and of course, it being the political capital of the country. Now, the organizations I took up were also interesting because they had been working for a very long time, at least since Gujarat violence. If not before that, a lot of them were actually even present before that also. And the reason why I took up organizations like this and cities like this is because I wanted to see how, over a period of time, how has the work of these organizations evolved. So those were the reasons why I took up these particular organizations in these particular cities. All of them had been functioning for a period of time. So they would have started with, just rehabilitation work, and from there had, sort of gone on to do other things. And I wanted to sort of track that, the change in their work. And the cities, of course, I chose these cities because they all had incidents of communal violence. Now, that's sort of what I wanted to tell you about in my effort to introduce you to my topic. These are the things I wanted to tell you. Just give me a second. Now to sort of tell you a little bit about the theory that I sort of based my work around. Now, Joan Galtung, who is one of the founders of this area in politics, that is conflict and peace studies, talks about peace in its negative and positive variety. Just like, we have studied about negative and positive peace, here Galtung talks about negative and positive liberty. Berlin talks about negative and positive liberty. Galtung talks about negative and positive peace. Negative peace, he says, is the absence of violence, whereas positive peace is the integration of human society. Now, societies can range from one which has durable or strong peace to weak or fragile peace. Now, most nations in this world are, removed from that strong peace category. They are more leaning towards the weak peace category. Now, the effort for states is always to keep working towards getting themselves to that strong and durable peace. So it's a spectrum where one end is strong and durable peace and the other is, weak peace. And the idea is to keep working towards getting to the strong peace side of the spectrum. Now, total and absolute peace is not possible to achieve. But, the idea is to keep striving towards getting strong peace, which is a combination of negative and positive peace. So not only the absence of violence, but also integration of human society. Now, when the definition of peace changed, from just ending of violence to the more engaged kind of association with a society, if you want to integrate human society, you need to engage with that society. So when that changed, other ideas around peace also changed. So then we have concepts of peacekeeping, the change of peacekeeping to peacemaking and peace building. Peacekeeping is, informed with that negative idea of peace. You end violence. You somehow go there and end violence. You would have heard of UN peacekeeping missions. That then there was peacemaking and peace building that was more informed by the positive side, positive, aspect of peace. That is, ending structural violence, going into the society and trying to change the society from within. Now, peacekeeping is almost like, ending violence with whatever method possible, sometimes even coercion. Peacemaking, however, to you need to understand the root cause of violence. You need to understand why a society erupted into violence before you can end the violence there. So you need to understand your context and then prepare yourself, or you need to then come up with sort of methods, or come up with solutions that are designed, that are catered to that particular problem. So, whereas peace building aims at building structures and institutions of peace, which can then sustain itself, so what we are getting at, or what I'm trying to tell you, is that from a very simplified definition of just ending violence, slowly this whole branch of study evolved. So instead of just ending violence, now it was, let's understand the root cause of violence. Okay, once we have done that, now let's create institutions that can then help sustain peace that will be brought to that society. Now, a shift from the idea of peacekeeping to peacemaking and peace building is when civil society interaction, or civil society engagement in conflict resolution and conflict transformation exercises becomes really important. Slowly, we come to the idea of sustainable peace. Sustainable peace involves a nexus between development, conflict, and peace. So, you need to ensure that a society is developed, all the markers of development, all the institutions of development are there in order to be able to end conflict and bring about peace. With the changing notion of peace and peace building, the approach towards conflict has also undergone a change. The shift from conflict management to conflict resolution and conflict transformation. So as the ideas around peace changed, so did the ideas around conflict. Conflict was no longer about managing conflict, that is, somehow end it. It now was to resolve it, and then also to transform conflict into peace and everlasting, or long lasting peace. Now, when this transformation happened, there was a shift from understanding peace as a simply end of violence to something more. You give people the tools to sustain that peace. The traditional approach of conflict management attempts to resolve conflict at a state level. We talk about diplomacy, you talk about negotiation, you talk about mediation, you talk about bargaining, or tactical bargaining, all words that are associated with the state. Slowly, it was realized that conflicts are not all about state. In fact, post the 90s, most conflicts have been intrastate than being interstate. So once the nature of conflict changed, the concentration on only states as the sole focal point of conflict resolution also had to change, because now there were people involved. So Oliver P. Richmond emphasizes that in the present context, conflict is no longer only a crisis of the state. Other issues such as identity politics, issues of ethnicity, development and human security issues have come to play a very important role in conflict. Increasingly, therefore, ways of conflict mediation, which involved traditional diplomacy, has become inadequate. Now, as the number of people who are engaged in a conflict have increased, we have had to think and rethink how we are going to address this conflict effectively. Therefore, what has become, essentially the need of the hour is a multi-dimensional approach to conflict resolution, and conflict transformation then becomes, the main goal, which is linked to a conflict transformation is all about sustainable peace. And therefore we need to figure out, how we can achieve something. When there are multiple parties involved in a conflict, you need to be able to address the issues of those multiple parties. So, there is a level of negotiation going on at the state level, but there is also a mid-level leadership at the level of which this kind of negotiation is going on, and then there is work happening at the grassroots level also. So a multi-layered approach to peace is what became essential. Now, in and as these changes happen, one realized that long-term commitment is needed. Peacekeeping is time-bound. You go there, you end conflict, you put some institutions there, your goal is to withdraw out of there. You want to come out of there. Conflict transformation, however, does not work like that. You cannot go there, you cannot implant something, and you cannot walk out of there. So what do you need essentially? You need people from those communities. You need people from communities in conflict to work for their own peace. So you need to create a leadership. You need to work towards building, a consensus for peace. And none of that can happen overnight. That can't happen in 3 months. That can't happen in 1 year. That takes a long-term commitment. So from a very nascent idea of peace as simply ending conflict, we came by the 90s, and even after, we came to this idea of multi-track diplomacy and not only ending conflict, but transforming a society. Now, one of the very interesting works in this regard is by Camilla Orjuela, who I might be pronouncing that name wrong. It's probably Orjuela. Camilla Orjuela, she does her work in Sri Lanka, and she tries to look at the civil society in Sri Lanka and its contribution to the peace building process there. And it's an amazingly interesting and insightful work where she talks about bottom-up peace building. The main idea here is that you cannot impose peace on a society. That's not going to work. No, you can never impose peace on a society and expect that to be long lasting. To make it successful, to make it enough sustain it over a period of time, civil society needs to engage. Civil society needs to engage specifically at the grassroots level, and only then can it can be a greater chance for the success of the peace process. Now, Orjuela suggests that civil society actors are considered better suited for peace work because of their ability to build grassroots networks, initiate dialogue with different communities at the same time without losing their credibility. These actors are less visible, less expensive, and much more flexible, and hence are more effective in the peace building process. Grassroots level mobilization for peace has become important in the present context because increasingly it has been felt that peace is not something which can be imposed on a society. The initiative for peace must come from within, and grassroots level mobilization, helps. It becomes a support system for initiatives that are coming from the top. So at the grassroots level, if you create awareness for peace, if you create a consensus for peace, then there will be a pressure, to, going up the scale to, sort of help, then, solidify the approach to peace altogether. So if negotiations are happening at the higher level, and the parties that are, together, who are part of this negotiation are not, they're not even trying to, come to terms with each other or see each other eye to eye. If there is a pressure building up from within the society that, we need peace, we need to end this conflict, it is more likely that people at the higher level are going to then respond to that pressure and try to seriously look into resolving the conflict. Orjuela suggests that civil society actors can prevent violent confrontation by promoting dialogue between communities, raising voices against gross human rights violations, creating public opinion to raise voices against state atrocities. Also, another important instrument in the hands of civil society is to reach out to the outside world when there is a, state oppression and human rights violation. In times of conflict, peace actors are involved in humanitarian aid, providing relief work. At the same time, civil society actors make efforts to create lines of communication between civilians of different groups, as well as civilians and armed groups where that sort of a conflict is happening. Now, spread of information and creating pressure on political and military leaders to resolve conflict can be achieved by the civil society. Orjuela talks about the boomerang effect, wherein civil society actors can use international contacts to influence other states and international organizations, which in turn can create pressure on national actors. In the post-war phase, the work becomes even more difficult because, the task of conflict prevention then becomes important, and rebuilding relations that had been devastated by conflict. Now, this is roughly the area in which I had situated my work. Now, I threw a lot of words at you right now. I told you about, dialogue, and I told you about, I think I told, myth busting. All of these are part of a whole. And all of these are happening simultaneously. Now, what I told you right now can be condensed into 7 categories of work, of peace building work that civil society organizations do. And we can judge their effectiveness, and we can judge what sort of work they are doing by trying to categorize or by trying to classify their work into any of these 7 categories. Now, like anywhere else in social sciences, categories are obviously not watertight compartments. So sometimes the distinctions are blurry, but we can sort of overall picture, we get an overall picture of what civil society organizations are capable of doing. So, the 7 categories are protection, monitoring, advocacy and public communication, in-group socialization, social cohesion, intermediation and facilitation, and service delivery. Now, protection, and when I started using this categorization to look at or understand civil society work here in India, I realized that all these 7 categories apply to India as well, to the organizations that I was looking at as well. Now, protection would involve protecting the minority community from acts of violence before, during, and after. So, people who are who know communal violence literature will know that someone like Paul Brass says that it is a sort of it is a continuous process. So communal violence is always in preparation. So there is a phase before the violence, there is a phase during the violence, and then there is after. Now, similarly, this protection work continues. It can, when tensions are rising, protection work, civil society organizations, mobilize themselves to protect minorities. During communal violence, this role becomes much less, because, that then, in active situations of violence, there's hardly anything uh, independent organizations can do. That's the state machinery's work. And then after this becomes really important, because, again, in communal violence literature and all this literature, you will see that while the bigger incident of violence completely uh, will last for, say, 4 or 5 days, smaller incidents of attacks on minority communities, attacks on minority shops, homes, will continue for months after. And then in the case of India, there were many incidents of fake encounter. There were incidents of youth being put behind bars under the pota. And, so many of these incidents that happened, where civil society actively engaged to protect the minority community. Then there is monitoring the peace. In the international context, a lot of time monitoring involves monitoring the peace process. That, you try to understand, you try to see that, the two parties come to the table, they listen to each other, they work out a way to broker peace, and after that also they, sort of work towards holding up their end of the bargain, that, they are going to they do not violate the peace accord that has been signed. In the context of India, this monitoring work involved, monitoring people in the camps, whether they were getting compensation, whether they were, whether the police were filing FIRs, whenever needed. So all those kinds of work became important in the Indian context. Now, where most of the effort goes into is advocacy and public communication. You need to build a consensus for peace. You need to make people aware that peace is important. So a lot of energy actually is spent in awareness building, in making people sort of come together, myth busting, getting them to open up a dialogue between. Okay, sorry. Then advocacy and public communication was one of the most important areas that, we civil society work did. Then there is in-group socialization. Now, in-group socialization simply means that, uh, within a group of people, within a certain community, you come together to, sort of feel like there is a connection between each other. You first need to be aware of your own rights in order to work for anything greater. So that's the other thing, in group socialization, where civil society organizations have a role to play. Social cohesion, of course, is, like, the most important work that civil society organizations do. They, the constant effort is to create platforms of dialogue exchange between two communities. Wherever there is a chance to create these sort of places or spaces in which communities can come together. And this is something that has been done remarkably by organizations here in India. So, uh, using platforms such as vocational training, mohalla libraries, and, using platforms, for, schools, community schools, and, celebrating festivals together. All of these, are used by civil society organizations
यार इसमें
to
क्या
sort
करती है
of bring uh, I think there's someone whose microphone is, yeah. So we the need is to give communities uh, that space where they can interact with each other. So after, when I went to Gujarat and elsewhere also, other parts of the country also, one important conversation that came up again and again and again, among various communities was that among various civil society organizations was that, the ghettoization process was, almost complete in most of these places. So people from Muslim areas never went to Hindu areas. People from Hindu areas never went to Muslim areas, and therefore all sorts of myth, all sorts of casual racism, casual, understandings of each other got in the way of them coming cohesively together. So in Gujarat, like the simplest of things that were done was getting people together for iftar parties, or getting people together for Holi, or starting a march that went from a Hindu mohalla into a Muslim mohalla. And some of these people who are now activists, who themselves have transitioned from being people who were being trained to become leaders, or who were just part of the part of these initiatives then, and now they have become leaders. When I spoke to them, their expression was simple. They were like, what they wanted to say was that we were in awe. When the first time we stepped into these localities, we saw that people lived just like we did, and suddenly a light bulb switched on somewhere, that, oh, these people are exactly like how we are. So these simple acts, they might look very anecdotal to a lot of people, and a lot of people might not give them the kind of importance they deserve. But this is the kind of work that civil society organizations have mostly engaged in. This is the work that has been the most fruitful for them also. Then there is intermediation and facilitation. This is something that in India there is a lot less scope of, simply because of the kind of conflict that we are dealing with. But intermediating between two groups of conflict, facilitating dialogue between two groups, or bringing them to the negotiation table so that we can end conflict. All of those things are done through intermediation and facilitation. And finally, and I think I can't stress how important this is service delivery. In the Indian context, no civil society organization wants to be known simply as an organization that works for peace. Because if you start brokering, or if you start broaching the topic of communal harmony, you will not be taken seriously, because there are so many other issues that are plaguing these people. In most places, civil society organizations, their main aim is to create, I was telling you about grassroots networks. That is exactly the goal of civil society organizations here as well. So what they do is they take up very seriously the issue of service delivery. What they do is, address the issues that people are facing in those localities. If you have someone to turn to every time you need to fill up a form, if you have someone to turn to who will help you negotiate the difficult processes of applying to various government services, if someone is coming to your locality to teach your children or to keep your children engaged, then chances are later on you might just listen to those people when they tell you, don't fight, don't engage in all this, listen to us. So to build trust, the route that most civil society organizations take is service delivery, is developmental work. Okay, you know the road the road needs fixing, let's take you to the municipality there, and file a complaint and all of that, and get this work done. Okay, the voter ID card needs to be filled up, the details need to be filled up. I don't know how to do that, I will do it. Most civil society organizations are engaged in this kind of work, and none of the civil society organizations that I spoke to, in fact, all of them, uniformly said that it is difficult to simply go broach the topic of peace. No one has time for that. So we need to be able to create those networks, which will then help us mobilize people later on if and when the need arises. Now, I'll tell you one last thing, about my research in particular, and then I will go move on to what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Is that that is basically women and women activists and peace building. Is that in my research I realized that there were two kinds of organizations that were operating in India. One was specifically community-based organizations, and the other organization were pan-India organizations. Community-based organizations concentrated on network building, on developmental activities. They had, their main goal was to go into communities and create networks within those communities and to help, do all the work, do works of social cohesion, do works of service delivery, do works of intermediation, all of those, provide platforms for dialogue exchange. All of those work were being done by the community-based organizations. And then there were the pan-India organizations, bigger organizations associated with IGOs sometimes, and people who were well-established activists, those kinds of people who, they worked at a pan-India level, and their main focus was research, to come up with enough material on communal violence. These were the people who would do fact findings. These were the people who would be engaged in research, and they were the think tanks, and they were coming up with materials, very interesting training material for communal harmony building. They would be the ones who would train smaller organizations to later, build their organizational structure. So all of those things were happening through these pan-India organizations. And it's again not like community-based organizations were not doing what pan-India organizations were like. It isn't mutually exclusive. But the thing is that the community-based organizations had a clear focus, and the pan-India organizations had a clear focus. And the pan-India organizations also did not necessarily have the kind of networking, grassroots level networking, that the community-based organizations were able to achieve. So this is more or less, what I wanted to talk to you guys about in terms of the overall, theme, or under which, this small work on women is situated. Now, Cynthia Enloe, who is a liberal feminist, once famously asked in her book the question, "Where are the women?" And this is something that I teach in my IR classes also, when I briefly address liberal feminism. And I think nowhere else is it more important, or maybe it's important in every other sphere. But for me today, this one question, sets the tone of what I want to talk to you guys about right now. And that is, in the context of conflict resolution and peace building, this question becomes really important, specifically when we are talking about, sustainable peace, when we are talking about inclusive peace. And inclusive peace cannot be achieved, if we do not take women into consideration, if we do not bring women into the focus, then it can't be inclusive peace. Now, in many parts of the world, women's organizations have immense contributions, towards the peace building process, or highlighting issues during conflict. For example, there is Mothers of the Disappeared in Sri Lanka organization that was basically trying to highlight human rights issues in Sri Lanka. Then there is that is during conflict. Then in Guatemala, there was the Association of Maya Desarrollo. Sorry, this organization was actually doing work of rehabilitation in the post-conflict situation. And there are many, there are Israeli women's group that are fighting for the rights of the Palestinian people. There are many examples of women's organizations all around the world that are working in the peace processes and in conflict situations. Now, they when it comes to inclusive and sustainable peace, we cannot achieve that. We cannot achieve any of that if we are going to keep the women out of this process. And in all these contexts, women have tried to broker peace, highlight human rights issues, and contributed to post-conflict rehabilitation as well. Now, in the context of India, it is very interesting, or very, to me, it was something noticeable, is that in the context of communal violence, the main issue where women were associated, or the one aspect which kept getting highlighted in the context of communal violence in India is the sexual violence that occurs during communal incidents in India, where women's bodies time and again become the sites of violence. And none more telling than the many testimonies that had come out of Gujarat post 2002, horrific incidents of violence against women. And most organizations that I spoke to had therefore concentrated, especially in the case of Gujarat in post 2002, towards rehabilitating these women, getting them justice, getting FIRs lodged, getting them, getting them the relief work that was required. And one of the organizations, Anhad, was led by a lady who had, done many fact-finding reports and had many conversations with victims of gang rape and sexual violence in post 2002 Gujarat. Now, that was one way of looking at women, but Enlo did not want the understanding of women to be restricted to just one understanding of women, and neither do I in my context. And therefore, when looking at the situation or the issue of women, what I realized is that there are, I can look at women in the context of peace building in two manners. One is, the women, one of the women who basically are, or the programs that are dedicated towards women, organizations that have programs dedicated towards women. And the other are the women themselves, the women that I met in my fieldwork process who had amazingly interesting stories. And I met some really important women in the women's movement in India today. I had the good fortune of meeting them. So, so those were two things that were happening, one where organizations which had dedicated programs, towards getting women into their grassroots level networking, and the other where women activists themselves who, were at the grassroots level and also heading organizations. Now, the presence of programs for women or targeting women were most concentrated in community-based organizations, because long associations with particular communities was essential for trust building. And again, in political science literature, in communal violence literature, we see that the occurrence of violence takes place at a certain economic level. It is in the lower economic areas that a lot of the incidents of violence takes place. So a lot of the women, a lot of the organizations worked in these areas as well. So women in lower income group communities were targeted because of their ability to build bridges. A lot of organizations had vocational training programs for women. The logic being, women from different communities, can find a common platform in these training programs, and then through their interaction, They can do a lot of myth busting and also provide platforms for dialogue exchange between communities. So the what community-based organizations realize is that there is a disconnect between people from two communities. Women who were at home, who were who were going about their daily business, of taking care of children, of taking care of the house, if they were given another platform where they could come interact, they come to learn another skill. So you teach them stitching, they come to learn stitching because then that is an additional source of income, and they end up venting their frustrations of the day. Or they start talking about how they had to stand in the line for water for an hour today, and the other woman from a different locality, from a different community, responds in the affirmative, saying that it's the same case for her, and they find a joint sort of ground to understand or share their life experiences. So these very simple, seemingly simple ideas were implemented by civil society organizations, and they thought that women would become a really important part. So most, if you were to ask me, what was the target audience for most of the organizations that you dealt with, I would say women and youth. Now, the logic, so this sort of activity is essential in terms of long-term or sustainable peace building. Now, women who are the primary caregivers, they take care of the house, they take care of the household, the children, are also in a position to change mindsets, especially of those in her care, that is her children. And if you start from from the new generation, you will probably be able to effect a mindset change. Most community-based organizations therefore believed that women have a very important role to play in social cohesion building. So where we situate in the larger scheme of things, women are in that little tiny area called social cohesion. Now, in Hyderabad, there were organizations and individuals, who would run vocational training centers and small self-help organizations for women in, areas which had a mixed population. Women would come there because, it is an additional source of income, or, because they just, if you run a school, an English medium school in a very lower income group locality, parents will send those children to those schools because they would feel that it would provide a better education, and they wouldn't care who or what religious people are going to that school. In the end, this school then becomes a platform where dialogue exchange can happen. Now, these were the sort of things were done in Hyderabad. Now, a major part of my work was obviously done in Gujarat, and because of its violent communal history, a lot can be said about Gujarat. Now, women played a very important role in the reconciliation process. Now, reconciliation is an ongoing process in Gujarat. It is something that probably never will end. But right after the riots, there was a immediate need for relief and rehabilitation, and slowly, then that work snowballed into going beyond that, and that is where the rehabilitation work start. Sorry, the reconciliation work started, and women played a very important role here. Now, researchers who have done, someone called Sarah Ahmed did a very interesting study in the post, 2002 Gujarat. Actually, there were two organizations that were set up immediately. One was called Aman Samuday, and the other was called Gujarat Harmony Project. Now, these two organizations that were actually set up by two IGOs, international organizations, and they sort of worked with local organizations that were already existing within Gujarat. They just gave two platforms, and many of the people who, like the next generation of social activists who came out of Gujarat, were all actually born in these two organizations and working for communal harmony right after the 2002 Gujarat violence. Now, in her work, Sarah Ahmed, suggests that women in the lower economic strata both in urban and rural areas were the most affected by the riots at that point of time. So most NGOs who were working at that point of time in Gujarat also had, previous prior experience with working with these women. So none of them were dedicatedly um, working towards communal harmony. That was not what their goal was. These were organizations that were already existing, and they partnered up with either Aman Samuday or Gujarat Harmony Project to just, bring peace and calm right there then into Gujarat post 2012. Post 2002. Now, uh, hence, when it came to reconciliation work, the partner NGOs sought out these existing connections because so Aman Samuday and Gujarat Harmony Project did not have that many links in, Gujarat that these local smaller NGOs who were not dedicated towards any kind of peace or rehabilitation work had. But those bigger organizations utilized these smaller organizations to build a network, to build connections, and through that start the reconciliation work in Gujarat. So there were social reconciliation workshops that took place, where women, uh, you know, uh, came for training, and then leaders were identified within these groups who then carried on this work within their own chawls and mahallas in Ahmedabad. Then there was Samarth, which was a partner NGO which created separate self-help groups for Hindu women and Muslim women, and then brought them together, to celebrate festivals together. Then there was the Sakhi Mahila Sangathan and youth leadership, which also entered riot-affected areas for relief work. Relief work went on for a year, more than a year in Gujarat, because Gujarat at that point of time was actually reeling from twin tragedies. In 2001, the earthquake had happened, and then in 2002, the violence occurred. So there was, one relief work actually got intermixed with the other, and therefore relief work went on for about a year. And in 2015 also, there were civil society organizations which had data about internally displaced families in Gujarat who couldn't go back to their own places uh, because of the fear and having lost everything. Now, these leaders then went on, the leadership that was created through these workshops, etc., within Aman Samuday or within Gujarat Harmony Project, then went on to create their own organization. And the 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 beauty of that would have been that these were people who already had networks, who had already had connections, and who already had trust within their respective communities. Then there were organizations like Ekta Nari Sangathan that organized community level, at the community level, they organized the marginalized women, and then they started providing them information about domestic violence and laws of domestic violence. Both Ekta Nari Sangathan and Nari Adalat did this work. And you will ask me, what has this got to do with, communal violence? But the thing is that through this kind of work, networks are built. You come talk to me about peace, I might be interested, I might not be interested. But I, a person who is facing some kind of violence daily in my life, if you come and talk to me about that, I will be very interested. I will immediately start trusting you. The next time when I come to you and I tell you, come with me, there are these other women also who have come, you can all sit together, have a conversation, and we can build something together, I will agree to you. So the process of network building, the process of talking about peace becomes much easier if there are already networks, if there are already connections that are there. So these kinds of organizations, they provided training and leadership development programs for women leaders, and so many of the people that I spoke to actually came out of these kinds of programs. They later on went on to build their own organizations, they later on went on to do their own thing in peace building, but they came out of this process in Gujarat in the post 2002 period. And of course, none of this is hunky dory, none of this is as romantic as it sounds, because like I told you, the story that I started with was in 2015. In 2015 also, ghettoization was a real very real issue in Gujarat and is in so many other cities that I have dealt with in my work. Now, the women's organizations that were created through the ENS, Ekta Nari Sangathan, they started, registering their demand for basic amenities and rehabilitation for violence affected women. Now, the youth and women leadership in all of these provided, they were provided with a skill set of advocacy, leadership, development, local institution building, which, anywhere in Gujarat, anyone you talk to will tell you that this led to the creation of a generation of leaders, generation of activists that came out of post 2002 Gujarat, specifically dedicated towards harmony building, towards networking, towards institution building. Now, a lot of the women that I met in the course of my field work had a similar story to tell. They had themselves witnessed violence. They lived, in areas which were affected by violence. Young women, had who had just completed maybe their master's programs, or they were working in some organizations. All had lived in places like Gomtipur, which was, Gomtipur was right next to one of the biggest camps that was created after 2002, camps where displaced people, displaced people who were displaced by communal violence had found place there. So these women, they witnessed violence themselves. Thankfully, they were not themselves affected by violence, but they were very much, affected, in the sense they were mentally affected by it. Young women from minority communities themselves witnessed to violence, then became part of a generation of peace activists in Gujarat. Now, two women I will talk to you specifically here. One is Shehnaz and another is Fahmida. Both used to, Fahmida used to work for a really small, you know, collective, a group, a youth group basically, who used to work in their own locality, and they were associated with Jan Vikas, a bigger organization from where they got all their training, where they got all their ideas and initiatives, and then they would basically put it forward through, they sort of do this work in their own communities. Now, Fehmida was, a fresh master's living in Gomtipur, working for a small organization, and she had been part of Janvika since 2012. Had attended various, training camps in Gujarat, and focusing on how to build your own NGO, all of that. And she's probably like about 7 or 8 years old when the 2002 violence happened. She witnessed it, and she, in personal conversations, she said, that changed her. And then she started working for this small collective, because they were working with children. They would get children from Hindu localities, Muslim localities, and put them together in play circles and play groups. The day I went to meet them, they had actually taken these children, about say 25 to 30 of them, of uh, ranging from the ages of 4 to about 7 or 8, for a field trip to I think a historical place somewhere very near to Ahmedabad. And they do all of the, every weekend they have different programs for these children, and they all then sit together and share their lunch boxes. And small initiatives like this, when you're working in a field as volatile as communal harmony building, actually do have impact. And that is what these organizations and these women were doing. Fehmida on the Shehnaz on the other hand was a little older. She was in class 10th. Her board exams were cancelled because of the violence. There was no, she did not know when it would again happen or not happen. She used to see people living in the camps. So, she got together with her friends and said, okay, fine, let's go to the camps and do some work for them. There, they net, or they met other people. So one of the things that you will know about, if you start reading about Gujarat, you will know that most of the relief and rehabilitation work actually happened from, initially the people associated with this kind of work were actually people outside of Gujarat. These were not people who were from Gujarat, and those who were from Gujarat were from usually minority religious institutions. Those were the kind of people involved. So, someone like Shahnaz, who was local, who knew the language, was immediately someone who could help in the rehabilitation and relief work for people who had come from outside the state. And that's exactly what she did. And then through this process, she actually got attached with Aman Samudai. Aman Samudai at this point of time had a program called Aman Pathik. They had, identified a group of, I think, 200 young people who they trained in, all kinds of aspects of communal harmony building, and then they sent them out into localities to carry on the work. Now, of course, Aman Samudai ran out of funds at some point, as time went on and as the 2002 incident became distant, in the eyes of fund donors. Funds dried up from 200, it became to 50, then 20, and then, these Aman Patiks basically became a non-functional program. But Shehnaz found her life's calling from here, and she joined, into the development and communal harmony building circuit in Gujarat, and works for an NGO now. The other important person that I met who has been instrumental in helping me in my PhD is Shabnam Hashmi, who heads Anhad, a Delhi-based organization, which is something I was also looking at. Now, Hashmi herself traveled to Gujarat as an independent, person, and she looked at the situation in Gujarat. She did a lot of fact finding. She actually did extensive interviews with women who had been victims of gang rape, and that helped shed light on the plight of these women. And that became a very important part of the post Gujarat scenario. Her work, especially. And then by 2003, she had decided that more needs to be done, and she decided to start her own organization. Now, Anhad is very different from all the other organizations that I, sort of spoke to, because Anhad was the only organization which was, trying to look at a political solution to the problem of communal violence in India. And therefore, the first time I went to Gujarat was in 2012, and that was before the assembly elections. And Anhad had gone full out, which is something that affected them also, because they crossed a line by engaging in politics. They associated themselves with women's wing of Congress and tried to mobilize women through awareness building and all of that. I followed one of the volunteers around. They had this thing called youth caravans where they were going all around the country campaigning almost in favor of the Congress party. I followed one of those young girls around, various districts of Gujarat in 2012. It was very interesting. It was really eye-opening. But at the same time, it laid bare that organizational weaknesses within the Congress party was also responsible for so much of what was the political situation there in Gujarat. And of course, in later conversations with people of other organizations, I realized that the civil society organizations did not take it, very well, this kind of direct political engagement that Anhad had tried to do. Riva, do I have like 5 to 7 more minutes?
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Now, the two other interesting women that I met in Gujarat, was a lawyer who has an organization called Safar Gujarat, and the other is Zakia Soman, who is is one of the founders of the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan. Now, Sophia Khan, who runs Safar, is the one who had her office in Juhapura. And a naive PhD student like me went and asked her, were you involved in the relief work, in the 2002? And her very I don't know what kind of, I don't know if I can call it wasn't curt or anything, but she, in a very uh, understanding manner, she told me, no, that was not possible for me. Because my neighborhood, she lived in Shahpur, again, one of the areas deeply affected by violence, another area where there was a big camp. And she said, for 3 months I couldn't sleep because in the morning I used to go do my regular work as a lawyer, helping people file FIRs, helping people negotiate the system. And then by evening I would get a call and rush back home because someone's house was getting attacked. The police was trying to take someone away. And in general, there was so much of unrest in my neighborhood and my locality. It was impossible for me to think about anyone else because all I was trying to do was protect myself. And in the beginning of that conversation, she had told me, I consider myself as a feminist, and I always thought that is my only identity. But post 2002, I had to confront that I had another identity, that I was a Muslim woman, and that shaped a lot of my work and a lot of my understanding of the situation because there was no way to escape my identity. Everywhere I went, everything that I did was centered around my identity, and therefore I had to take it in my stride. I had to address it head on. And she also said something that is very, very telling, and I think very something that we should keep in mind. She said, she told me, that inclusion is something that only minorities are bothered by because that is their headache, because they are the ones who are facing exclusion. Therefore, a lot of the work that was being done, in Gujarat were done by minority organizations, were done by minority people. Because at the end of the day, it became their headache because they were the ones who were at the receiving end of all of this. And finally, let me talk to you about Zakia Soman. She is, I think, one of the more famous people. She's associated with the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan. And at this point of time, she says that, in my conversations with her, she says that, uh, the post 2002, she was a lecturer at that point of time. She was teaching in a college, going about her business. She had witnessed violence earlier on in life. She had family members who had witnessed communal violence, but really that was not something that really bothered her that much. So she went about her business, and then one day she went to the Gomtipur camp, and that changed her life forever. Again, someone like her who, she acknowledges her privileged background, her education and everything. And again, something she says, same like Sophia, she also says, the first thing I had to do was confront, I was confronted by my identity as a Muslim woman, and I had to keep that in mind. Now at that point of time, Soman and some of the other people, she joined Aman Samudaya at this point of time. Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan came about later in 2007, actually. But at that point of time, she was associated with um, Aman Samudai, and she was, they were helping people file petitions with the NHRC. She was helping people, elections were announced in Gujarat at right about that point of time in 2002. So she had to help people, who had lost everything, and work with the election commission to help these people, get their right to vote, and filing FIRs, all of that. Now, she says something, and that was also quite telling. She says that, from where did this idea of the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan come about? She says that, one of the incidents that happened post 2002 were Muslim men or young youth being taken away under quota, and various cases slapped against them. Most of it was fabricated, as there is a lot of proof about that. It's not something that one says from a biased point of view, but there is a lot of proof of all of that. And it was the mothers and family, female family members of these people, these youth, that stood up to fight for them. these women who had never stepped out of their homes, who had, who she says, they're all burqa clad women who had never stepped out of their homes, who had certain restrictions, and not like there is anything wrong in any of that. It is one's belief and that should be respected. But she says, to tell us that these were women who had never stepped out of their homes. These were women who had never traveled anywhere alone, but they took up the cause of justice. They took up the cause of upholding democracy. They held press conferences. They held public meetings. They raised voices. And that is when, women who then became, what became Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, the women who were associated with Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan realized that if these women are given platforms, then they can affect concrete change. They can bring about, concrete change. And much later, of course, Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan started talking about the Quranic laws and how that affects and what should be done, what women can do. So what does all of this tell us? I spoke to you, I told Ariba that I'll talk for 40 minutes. I have gone on for an hour and 10. So what does all of this really mean? Women and their agency is important. Wherever women are given agency, they are able to fight for, a certain whatever is needed to be fought for. Women in leadership roles are important because, if there are enough women in leadership roles, policy change will come about. In the case of India, a lot of concentration has been on creating leadership among women, especially in terms of issues of violence, because that is what was the most important aspect. The victimhood of women is what became more important in most situations of conflict in India. However, like most other civil society organizations, working in this space, women's organizations also don't have anything that is binding them together. One of the findings of my studies was that civil society organizations' efforts are very disjointed. They have not been able to come together. They have not been able to, develop a movement for peace. Similarly, for women's organizations, there are very few dedicatedly, women's organizations that are dedicated towards communal harmony building, first of all. But even then, there isn't any cohesion. There are only organizations who work for women's issues. Their work remains disjointed and therefore less effective. The gap between policy and grassroots level work is ever increasing in India. So there is no concrete policy changes that have come about. What therefore is needed is women's organizations that can dedicatedly work towards peace and harmony building, and only then we can see some change happening. And with that, I will end my talk.
Let me begin by thanking you, Sinjini, for accepting our invitation and giving this passionately interesting talk, because I have come to learn so much from this. I just love the way how it was so well organized and systematic. Not only that, the information, the facts, and the in-depth, analysis of the situation and the suggestions that you offer at the end of your research is just wow. I mean, we have so much to learn from you. Thank you so much for this. And I had no idea that so much work was going on in these places, and conflict resolution of this sort, where women are taking stances, they are forming organizations and doing it at such big levels. I didn't realize that they were all at grassroots level also and national level also. We hear of it, off and on, but to have an in-depth analysis and to be able to understand the whole situation from this, somebody who has gone in, you have gone in, interviewed, spoken to these people, worked with them, so we get a better perspective. And to get it from a researcher's point of view, that is exactly what we got. You have done a fabulous work with that. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us this talk. It was great, and I don't just mean it for myself, I am sure the participants all would say the same. It was a very good talk. Thank you so much for this. It's a very memorable, I think one of the best that we have had on a forum so far, because it is so well researched, well organized. well delivered also, because sometimes people have idea of what they want to say, but they don't come prepared, and sometimes people come prepared but they get so nervous that they don't do such a good job. But I think overall, in all the criterias, you have aced it. Thank you so much once again for this. We
Thank
have,
you.
I hope the participants ask questions as well. I think they're so mesmerized by what they had to hear that they have not come up with questions, though there are a few that I received personally. So let me begin. I can just ask you a question and you can respond to that one question, and we go move ahead like that. So the first question we
Sure,
have is
sure.
that you said in your talk that you don't want to specifically look at civil society, but could you please elaborate on the effects of communal violence on a civil society? What are the effects of communal violence on civil society?
Okay, so do you want me to answer one question at a time or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please go on.
okay. So when I said that I don't want to address this whole category of civil society, what I really meant is that in Indian literature, like someone like Neera Chandok has written about civil society, and there's a lot of debate and discussion over what can be called as civil society. There are right wing organizations which are quite disruptive also, which are part of the civil society, and there are also NGOs and IGOs also, which are part of the civil society. Then there's someone like Partha Chatterjee, who does the distinction between civil and political society. So I didn't want to go into those kinds of discussions. I just simply wanted to state that when I say civil society organizations, I just simply mean NGOs, IGOs, and research organizations, think tanks, all of those which work in the society, within communities, and on communal harmony building, without going into any kind of detailed kind of analysis of the category civil society. So that is what I meant when I said I don't want to get into that kind of discussion. But effects of communal violence on civil society, is visible in every field that I have been to. Ghettoization, people living, Mumbai after 2002, sorry, in after 1992, Mumbai was completely divided, into specific Hindu areas and specific Muslim areas. Hyderabad has that, specific areas in which Muslim communities are more in number, and where, there are specific areas which are dominated by Hindus. Ahmedabad, I told you, a place which is where people had to escape, to escape violence, to escape conflict, is now known as mini Pakistan. So the most effect that society sees is that of division, is that of this kind of ghettoization that comes with communal violence. And communal violence is an ongoing thing, in a situation, in a place like India, in a situation like India. It's not like communal violence, if the active phase of violence ends, that communal violence, or that there is communal harmony. That's never the case. It's an ongoing process, something that we need to keep working on in order to prevent future violence from happening.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think Afra Salim wants to ask a question herself. So I request Afra to please ask a question. Over to you, Afra.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Can you hear me well? Hello?
Yes, yes. Please continue, Afra.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, Sinjini. I am so glad I decided to attend. I thought your talk was so illuminating. I'm like the final writing stage of my thesis. I've just done fieldwork and it was cut short because of COVID. But I don't know where to begin. I just love how you structured your talk. And I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, I like how you said, I'm not going to get into hair splitting debates about concepts and categories. At the end of the day, that's not the larger point of it, that you laid the terms of your debate so well. And that I really, really enjoyed your talk. And I think that's how it should be done. So I'm looking forward. I mean, it gave me a very good idea of how to go about my own pre-submission seminar, because even I'm working on a topic that is so intensely controversial. I work on, women's rights and legal pluralism, Muslim personal law, and the rest of the jazz. So it's been hellish the last 6 years trying to, put things across in a way that you can effectively communicate. So I really love that. And I also wanted to share that, yes, what you mentioned the beginning, right, about your field work taking an auto to Juhapura, that sort of resonated so much with me, because I was utterly horrified just last year in October. I am obviously a Hyderabadi, and I took an Uber to go to one of my sites, which is Jamila Nishat's Shaheen in Shalibanda, right? And you can see who your driver is. You can meet the chap. This guy is a local Hyderabadi, right? He wasn't like a migrant so that he would have to be scared. And I was utterly appalled that, he's like, नहीं वो area में हम नहीं जाते, and he just dropped me in the middle of the road and he ran away. He was like, हम गलीज में नहीं जाते. And it was just, I was horrified. I hadn't thought that something like that would happen. So yeah, this is like a very serious issue, and I'm so glad that you're working on it. And of course, I didn't know about BMMA originating. That was a very interesting anecdote that made it's interesting. So I just learned a lot, and I think I won't take away any of your time. But I wanted you to share a little bit. I think this would be my question. Um, I have noticed that how you are situated as a researcher makes such a huge difference to how your fieldwork unfolds, how your respondents interact with you, whether they're curt, whether they're, the positioning and the location. That is not something anyone can ever transcend. And because I am a practicing Muslim woman who wears the hijab, but I also found that speaking English, right, does make you somewhat of an outsider. But of course, I also speak Urdu, a native speaker. So that made things very interesting. I wanted you to reflect a bit on how do you feel that you being like a Hindu woman, right, a visibly Hindu woman. I don't know if you wore a bindi or you strategically left it out. But how did that affect your field work? Like just some thoughts on that, and how did you navigate it? Because it's something I'm thinking a lot about, because I think in the introduction and the other chapter, I will have to really address this head on, right? Look, how are you located as a researcher, and how does that
Right.
affect? Yes, that's my question.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Afra. That was quite that. It's always heartwarming to share with someone anxieties that. So I understand where you're coming from. And as far as identity, I didn't thankfully ever wear a bindi, but there were other telltale signs. Only when you go with a name like Sinjini Bhattacharya, you really don't have a lot of place to hide. I have had I have had to learn it. For one good thing for me, one thing that worked in my favor was most of the time, I was going through organizations. I was going to meet someone saying that, this person has sent me to meet you. So so open problem, but where the judgment came was of course age related judgment, because I looked young, and therefore, oh, you're, like, okay, so this person is coming. So that thing. And in that context, I remember an incident that happened to me in Hyderabad. I had gone to meet I somehow reached the house of a local leader, a community leader from the Valmiki community. And after our hour and a half long interview, he insisted that I eat lunch with their family. And I was that was my first experience of field work, going out into the field, and I never used to eat when I went out. I did not like eating alone, so my idea was go do your work, rush back to the university, go to GOPS, eat, and then go back to the hostel and just die. But that particular day he insisted, and I said no. He again insisted, and I said no. And then his brother was sitting right next to him, and he casually said, "आप हमारे घर खाना नहीं चाहते तो कोई बात नहीं." And I immediately realized that what all was working in favor or against me at that given moment, where my identity had become a very big problem there, because I came with that title Bhattacharya, and I came with that the appearance of, I go to a central university, I looked privileged, I reeked privilege, And here was a man from a Dalit community who wanted to offer food. And the first thought that entered his mind was that she does not want to eat because it is my house. And although I was not hungry and not because I did not want to eat at this place, I immediately said, no, 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 no problem. I will eat. It's okay. I will eat. So I sat while his wife cooked, and she cooked an elaborate spread for me with biryani and whatnot. I ate and I came back. So after my, me dealing with my identity, um, I had not had to deal with it in a very so much of a direct manner because uh, I went through, like I told you, I went through someone always, I was getting in touch with someone, someone like Shabnam Hashmi was probably directing me to another smaller organization, or someone like Hiren Gandhi was, like, pushing me, like saying, okay, fine, go talk to that person, tell him that I have sent you and talk to him. So for those reasons, probably they spoke to me, and because I was, I exuded, the youthful naivety of a researcher, they probably opened up to me also. But I also had to, negotiate, these kind. But this is something only you learn only when you know something is thrown at you. Before that, you never sort of learn, how to deal with it.
And
And of
I
course,
just
for you, it's a very different,
anecdotes. I just love your anecdotes
sorry.
because such I I'm saying that I just love your anecdotes because it gives the whole new perspective. It is so much colorful, because I have never been on field trips, and when you guys talk of this, it's such revelation, that how people respond, what mindsets they come in for, even for an interview, what is going on at the back of their mind, and how you are navigating that. Thank you for this. I think it throws a lot of insight into how research goes on, at grassroots levels. Thank you so much for that. We just received another question from Shravani. Her question is that, as you specified, it is undisputable that the work towards communal harmony comes mostly from minority organizations due to the fact that they have learned its importance from the lack of it. So, what efforts are to be taken directed towards getting the privileged majority involved in building communal harmony?
Right. So this was like this was specifically in the case of Gujarat also. Like when I said that post 2002, people who were living in the camps, the help excuse me, the help they got were from two sources. One was international NGOs. There was CARE, there was Action Aid. So like the Gujarat Harmony project and was something that was CARE was funding, and Action Aid was funding Aman Samuday. Basically, that is the like that's a backstory. And these are two bigger international organizations basically. Other than that, there were Muslim organizations, Muslim religious organizations, which came with its own set of problems because these Muslim religious organizations then later on went to set up conditions that you can they set up colonies, rehabilitation colonies, and said you can enter these colonies and you can live in these colonies only if you abide by our rules. So that came with their own set of problems. Now, when it comes to efforts from the the majority community, slowly those kinds of efforts were obviously seen in Gujarat, in the context of Gujarat at least, because there are organizations and there are people within those organizations who do belong to the majority community. And I had Jan Vikas. Jan Vikas obviously was an organization that was working much more since the 80s, but post 2002 it sort of started working on the aspect of communal harmony. They started concentrating on that. And even Center for Development, again, something that was already in existence, then motivated, changed their direction. But changing mindsets of people is a long-term work, requires long-term engagement, and I don't think there can be ever an end to it. And as the political situation and the circumstance in this country has changed, the context in which we are operating has changed. The role that civil society organizations can play is shrinking every day. At one point of time, people like Shabnam Hashmi were called as consultants for various government projects. They were asked to be part of various government projects as consultants. That kind of space is shrinking, be it funding. The one major thing that you can see in front of your eyes is the way in which these civil society organizations are being attacked is by the way the funding is being cut off. If you don't have funding, you have no way of operating, and these civil society organizations are right now facing that kind of a situation. And similarly, the majority community, and that's a very interesting question actually, because that's the main goal of these civil society organizations, to create those bridges, to create those platforms, to sort of bring the majority community to a place where they realize the importance of this kind of work, they realize the importance of communal harmony in this country. And therefore, it's something that is a continuous process. There can't be any end to it. The methodology has to remain the same, only what civil society organizations are right now doing, but it takes so that's why they try to they concentrate a lot on the youth, they concentrate a lot on children. If you're able to bring up a generation which grows up knowing a different kind of reality, maybe then the world will change. So that kind of a thing.
This is the most important part, building a generation with a different mindset. That is more feasible compared to going around trying to change people's perception, because now they are done. Their mindsets are set, you just can't
Yeah.
change it, or it's very difficult to change a person's mindset. That is very true. And then another question that has come in is, does communal violence make the transition from civil society to political society, where the government with a threat of violence restores social order?
Can you repeat the question once again?
Yeah. Does communal violence make the transition from civil society to a political society, where the government with the threat of violence restores social order?
So, so that's the thing. So, if you go by the definition of political society, now that the like political society is basically the society, like that part of that part which basically engages or holds up the rights. That's what Chatterjee says. For Chatterjee, in his definition of political society, he says that is the that it's political society is that which upholds the rights of in the most simplest of terms. That is the thing, upholds the rights of people, fight for the rights of people. So he makes a distinction between civil society and political society. He says that civil society upholds the state, while political society is what we usually understand as civil society, that is upholding the rights of the people. And in case of in situations of communal violence, in India specifically, we what we see is a state machinery oftentimes acts as a is biased. There's a lot of bias that exists in the state machinery. And during communal violence, the role of civil society is very minimal, because there's hardly anything they can do. And again, examples of this are very much there in Gujarat, from Gujarat, where it was exceedingly difficult for civil society to mobilize, state support. So I don't know if I agree to the transition from civil to political society, but in terms of state reaction to communal violence and civil society's role during communal violence, it is very minimal, because there is hardly anything civil society can do at that point, even if they are raising issues, or they're raising like elsewhere, civil society organizations have raised the topic of human rights violations. There's large scale human rights violation happening. But in Gujarat, that did not happen. People got to know months after all of this, the horrific cases. I don't think, I need to go into the details, but, the horrific acts of criminal violence, or, acts, especially on women, that happened, came to light much later, and civil society could not do anything there. And I don't think, if you see what happened, few months back in Delhi, Same thing. Civil society was not able to do anything during communal violence. Even like they mainly start working after and before. If they get to know, they can try to calm tensions, but that requires very deep connection with the society. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And the last question for the day is, can you comment on the politicization of peace? How adversely
Sorry.
does politicization of peace?
Okay.
How adversely does this affect freedom of citizens in a society in the aftermath of communal riots or tensions?
Politicization of peace. Okay, so I mean, I'm sort of like not understanding the context probably a little bit, but let me like tell you what I sort of like think about it. You know, uh, there is nothing which is not political. That's let's just get that first out of the way. So peace is political. As is conflict, so is peace, and peace comes out of, like, the peace building process, or the idea of peace comes out of that particular context of conflict only. So if the conflict is politicized, so will be the peace process. But hardly, the peace process is something that has not, been taken up by the state ever. Like relief rehabilitation is different than an actual peace process, and something where the state's role has been completely absent. And if you take Gujarat, then there was Muzaffarnagar. Everywhere, the what becomes clear is that even though you can make relief and rehabilitation something that states can uh, do, but the state has a role to play. But reconciliation is something which is the peace building process or the peacemaking process. There the state is completely absent, the will of the state is completely absent, and the lack of will is visible in its dealing with civil society organizations, in its dealing with this whole where when we deal with this the lack of opportunity that civil society organizations are given in terms of a dialogue with the state. Everywhere else, that's something that is completely missing in the Indian context. Now, these are big organizations. Forget small organizations. Even for bigger organizations, that lack of there's a definite disconnect between civil society organizations and the state.
Okay, thank you, Sinjini. I would like to now invite Asta Binzani, PhD research scholar at the Department of Political Science from Banaras Hindu University, to give the vote of thanks. And meanwhile, Zeba Tamkanat, research scholar at English Department, University of Hyderabad, can please share the feedback link. Thank you. Over to you, Asta.
Thank you, Ariba. I would like to convey a heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Sinjini Bhattacharya for such an interesting lecture on role of women community activists in communal harmony building in India. I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today. The participation has helped us become an enlivening experience. I would like to extend my thanks to the President of AIRS, Ariba Muazzam, for her tireless efforts which have made this event possible. I would like to thank Ajab Rangoonwala, Farisuddin Ali Muazzam, Zeba Muazzam, Mohammed Shebu Shaibu, Manasa Uppuluri, and Evangeline Nongklo for their help with making this lecture a success. Thank you. Over to you, Ariba.
Thank you, Asta, for that. Sinjini, if you would like to share your experience of being on a forum today, that would be quite helpful.
I see some of my students here, so so very nice of them to come and support their poor teacher on a Sunday morning, nonetheless, Sunday afternoon, nonetheless. So that's full on total moral boost. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you also. And it was really nice. It was after a very long time that I opened up my PhD and put together the talk today. So really nice to do this. Something, I was in the middle of a lot of other things, far removed from research. So this was a very nice welcome break. And thank you for the response. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for inviting me because, I feel like a really tiny fish in a sea of like really beautiful stars that you have lined up for all the other sections. So really, really thank you. And hope to do the future associations and all of that. So thank you so much, Ariba.
It was our pleasure, absolutely. You have done so much by giving us such fresh perspective into such a complex topic and such a controversial topic. You dealt with it so nicely that I think not one person be able to say कि ये गलत बोल दिया ये controversial बोल दिया it was so well articulated also there was no scope for somebody coming out and saying this was wrong, this is what I don't agree with. I think you've done a fabulous job, especially of focusing on women who come up and work hard to change the situation. I think that was the most interesting part for all of us as women in India, working towards changing society. Thank you so much, Sinjini, for this. Thank you, participants, for joining us on the Sunday afternoon. And I hope to see you in our next lecture. And with this, I think we finish the event and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you and bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. I think there was a glitch and the participants did not receive the feedback. I'm working on it. Please bear with me. I'll just post the feedback link. If it does not work, I will be posting the same in the groups where you all can fill the forms. Thank you so much. Have a great day.